Hello, everyone. Benson used to be a community where you could have a civil conversation, even if you disagreed with the person you were talking to, but no more. Apparently, if you want to talk to someone with an opposing viewpoint, you're going to have to get into the gutter. Let's go. And welcome back, everyone. Today's podcast, this episode, is a little different. I don't have a guest. I do have an empty chair, and in a minute you'll understand what that's supposed to signify. But I want to talk about a change that's come over this community, over a couple of issues that have really brought to fore how hard it is to have a civil conversation anymore. First, there's the aluminum dynamics plant, the aluminum plant, and all the rhetoric and anger and mudslinging that's gone along with the conversation over that. Now, regardless of your point of view, the unfortunate thing is we can no longer have a civil conversation when we disagree with these things. I grew up in this town. I left for about 23 years, traveled around the country. I worked in Florida. I was a TV news anchor and reporter for Fox News. I was a columnist for Scripps newspapers. I covered Congress. I covered state legislatures. My whole career was based on conversation. And very rarely did I run into the kind of thing that seems commonplace these days, and that is if you disagree with someone, most people seem to want to drag you down into the gutter where they can use, well, frankly, filthy language, expletives, and yell. And I want to tell you a little story that'll tell you where I'm coming from about my father. My dad, Miles' old father, was one of the most respected people in this community. When he passed away, we had to move the location for his service 4 times. Because so many people kept calling and saying they were going to attend the service, we knew that we had to find a place that could handle the overflow. He believed in civil discourse, and he was one of the most honest people I knew. I remember one time we were at the bank. A gentleman named Robert Bivens was the general manager, and I was with my dad. I was about 14 or 15. I was in high school. And we left the bank. We were driving back to our place in St. David at the time. And Dad suddenly said, "Oh, shoot, we've got to go back." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because I've got Bob's pen." He turned around, drove back 3 or 4 miles to give Bob Bivens back his pen. And I'll never forget that. He said, "It's not mine, it's his, and I need to give it back." But that's the way he was with everything. And when I was even younger, I remember having a conversation with my dad about the garbage service. I must have been, 8 or 9, and I asked him, I said, "Dad, who decides what company's going to do that? How do we pay for it?" And then he explained to me about taxes and city taxes and the city council and how contracts are awarded. And he took me to a council meeting a couple of weeks later. I'll never forget how well run and evenly modulated that meeting was. Everyone was polite, even people who had opposing viewpoints. In fact, one of the reasons he took me to that meeting was because they were discussing the garbage service and a new contract and how much it was going to cost the city. And my dad told me afterwards, he said, because I asked him, I said, "Well, it seems to me that a couple of those people were pretty angry, but they didn't let it get out of control." And my dad said, "If you have to use the F word, if you have to use foul language, if you have to yell, if you have to lie, to get your viewpoint across, and you've already lost the argument or the debate. I'll never forget that. But unfortunately, it seems that now so many people believe otherwise. They believe that the only way to win the argument is to use the F word, to use expletives, to throw as much hash and vile filth at the people who disagree with them as possible, and to yell and to bang on the floor and, in general, act like a child having a tantrum. Now, this is my viewpoint, no one else's, although I think there are plenty of people out there who will agree with me. But let's take the recent discussion over the proposed bowling alley as an example, and aluminum dynamics. George Scott is executive director of the Southeast Arizona Economic Development Group. And I know George. He is a friend, a personal friend, I'm proud to say. He has put a lot of time and energy into this community because he loves Benson. He wants the best for it, unlike what many people have said over the aluminum dynamics situation. George has been accused of things that are totally untrue, and one of the things that prompted me to do this commentary was when someone posted on Facebook that because he supports ADI, he must be on their payroll. He must be taking kickbacks or bribes. He must be making something on the issue. That's just a vile lie. It's made by someone who can sit behind their computer, cloak themselves with the supposed validity and respectability of the keyboard, and make accusations that have no basis in fact, and in fact that they know are probably not true, but they make them anyway. Casting someone's character into the gutter like that is inexcusable. All that person, and you know who you are, all that person has to do is pick up the phone, call George, and say, "Can I come down and talk to you? I want to tell you why you're wrong and why I think my position is correct." And then come down and have a civil conversation. But you won't. You're a coward. We have so many cowards in this community who hide behind the keyboard, cloak themselves with respectability, and then make, frankly, claims that are just outlandish and total BS. Now, if you have a viewpoint that you think is correct, it's your responsibility to somehow bring that viewpoint to the people who disagree, but in a way that you can convince them that you're right. And calling people names and making accusations like that doesn't do it. I want to point to a recent thread on Facebook over the bowling alley, where Jennifer Rowe, who is one of the Economic Development Group board members, came out in basically a very quick comment that showed she was in favor of this. And someone said, as a reply, "Well, you're on the SAEDG board, correct?" Well, yeah, but that doesn't mean that she isn't entitled to an opinion. That doesn't mean that she can't say what she wants to say. But apparently this person implies that because she's on the board of directors, she's disqualified from being able to say anything about it. You see, everyone has a right to their opinion. Opinions are like you know what. They all stink unless they have validity, and everyone has one. What I'm trying to say is this community has moved so far away from being able to have a civil conversation about anything. I don't know if we can ever get back to that. It's a shame. It really is. And I wish that people would simply understand that other people aren't going to agree with anything, with everything they have to say, and that's okay. A lot of you are probably going to get mad and not agree with what I have to say, and that's okay too. Pick up the phone, call me, and tell me why. And then maybe I'll put you in that empty chair right there, which is where you're at right now. You understand what I'm saying? If you have the guts, then let's have a civil conversation. You know, threats have no place in any discussion. And I've heard those too. And this is really typical of where we've gotten to as a society, because this happens all too often, but I never thought it would happen here in Benson. I had Michael McCune, a local social media influencer, on my podcast, and we were talking about how he was canceled and blocked by the people opposed to ADI because he started asking questions as soon as they asked him to join the group about their strategy and what they were doing and why they were doing it. And they didn't like the tone of his questions, so they kicked him out. And it's unfortunate because Michael is a smart guy. And if he could be a part of the conversation, he would probably bring a lot to the table. Okay? But it seems that that is the norm. Well, I did the podcast, and a couple of days later, I had an email to my podcast email address, and it said, "I know where you live." Like I'm going to be intimidated by that. Well, my only thought to you and to everyone else is this: tell me who you are, especially if you know where I live. I get up, I leave the house. Half the time, I can't even remember where I live. I'm at that age where I have to make little notes to myself, and I want you to tell me who you are, so if I get lost, I can call you and get back home, and we'll have a civil conversation about that. Thank you.